Chapter 1. Men. Why couldn't they train as easily as dogs? Sit, Faith Hamilton said, holding the hot dog over Bailey's muzzle. Stay. Stay. The wire-haired terrier stared wide-eyed at the wiener, slobber dripping from his mouth. Drool puddled on the hardwood floor of her cabin, but Faith didn't mind. Living in the woods outside of Seattle had taught her not to sweat the small stuff. Dirt and drool were everyday occurrences. Good. Slowly, she set the treat on the dog's nose and backed away. Calm. Breathe. She raised her hands and then lowered them, hyper-aware that her super hunky, amazingly sexy Yowza-did-you-ever-want-him next-door neighbor stood behind her watching her every move. You're being a good boy, she sang. To the twitching pooch. Almost finished. Cross-eyed, the dog stared down his nose. He trembled in anticipation but didn't move even a tiny muscle. See, Faith said. He obeys. Look at him. He's like a different dog. Carter Griffin crossed his arms over his chest and leaned against Faith's kitchen counter. 2 weeks ago you would have lost your fingers doing something like that. His master is going to be impressed. Bailey belonged to one of Carter's coworkers, who apparently needed help getting his dog under control. Carter had given Faith's name as a recommendation. Must have been convenient having a professional dog trainer living next door, and she'd been happy to start up training. All it takes is focus, patience, and the willingness to really work with him. That, and being a 25-year-old werewolf who can sense what a dog really needs. Well, she corrected, Carter and Bailey's master were werewolves, too, and they hadn't had much luck. He did great. As long as his master continues the training techniques at home, Bailey will be the most well-behaved dog he's ever had. Won't you, boy? The dog shook slightly, and then regained his composure, the wiener teetering on edge. What's your schedule like for the rest of the month? Pretty packed. Carter reached into his back pocket to pull out his wallet. His shirt sleeve crept up his wrist, revealing the tattoos hiding there. The designs were gorgeous and intricate, spiraling up his arm. What she wouldn't give to spend the weekend studying the tattoos marked over every inch of his gloriously naked body. She couldn't help it, she shuddered. Why? Is his master interested in teaching him a few more things? Bet Carter could teach her a thing or two. She shuddered again. Carter shrugged his big, sturdy shoulders. Maybe. Well, Bailey knows the basics, but tell him if he wants to get really advanced, I suppose I could teach him more tricks. Another couple weeks of lessons and she could get Bailey to fetch the paper or shut the fridge after he brought his master a cold beer. He might even be able to use the toilet if Carter's coworker really wanted to get crafty. Do you know what he had in mind? You and me tomorrow night. He didn't have it in mind, I did. You get my drift. Carter dropped a bill on the counter to cover the training sessions. Pizza. Beer. Some really cheesy action flick. Bailey whimpered, begging to be released. Faith knew the feeling. Last summer she'd watched Carter chop firewood on his back lawn, shirtless and sweating. It took every ounce of willpower she had not to rub her hands over his glistening muscles as he moved and flexed. She'd actually whimpered aloud and thought he'd heard her as he paused and turned her way. What would he look like in his wolf form? She wondered for the umpteenth time. Although they often talked about Seattle Wolfpack business, their alpha and other mutual wolf friends in the pack, they'd never shifted in front of each other. His hair would probably be dark and slick, but would his body be just as massive as it was in human form? Would he exude an overwhelming sense of power? Did he ever wonder about her wolf form? He'd certainly never let on. Boy, you really know what a woman wants. Faith smirked as she imagined him, shirtless and wielding an axe. I don't have anything better to do on a Friday night than check out Jackie Chan. Truth be told, action films weren't her favorite, and Jackie Chan needed to hop on the fast track to a retirement home. But for the last year or so, every Friday night, Carter had hiked the half-mile from his cabin to hers and they'd had action movie marathons. It was always platonic, usually ending around midnight with Carter walking home and Faith going to bed alone. No matter how much Faith wanted Carter to make a move, he wouldn't. She mentally snorted. Why would he? She wasn't his type, not by a long shot. The women he dated were tall, blonde, Kate Upton lookalikes. Every guy's fantasy. Faith, on the other hand, was the exact opposite, 5'3" size, 12, brunette, and with a nasty scar running down the side of her neck. You sure I'm not taking up too much of your time? Carter leaned over the counter and nailed her with a smoldering glance that warmed her cheeks. I hate to monopolize your Fridays. She shrugged. I don't mind. What else would I be doing? Waxing my legs? Washing my hair? She flipped the ends. That's not me. But if you come over early, we can give each other facials. You should give lessons on how to be the type of woman every man wants. He was such a flirt. Knock it off. He really shouldn't joke with her this way. It made her think things could be different between them. But if he thought she was attractive, he would have made a move by now. If he were interested, he wouldn't have wasted time dating other women. He certainly wasn't shy. I mean it. Chuckling, Carter shook his head, then headed for her fridge. You're no fuss. You don't spend hours in front of the mirror getting ready. How many times have I seen you in your sweats? She put up her hands. Let's not go there. Oh God, she'd gotten too comfortable too soon. The last few weeks had been rough, so she'd relaxed more than usual and broke out her yoga pants. That wouldn't be happening again. That's it. That's what I've been doing wrong, he said, bending over to pull a Coke out of the fridge. I should be looking for a girl like you. She averted her gaze from his backside moments before he turned, Coke in hand. Want one? He asked. No thanks. She shook her head. And to be honest, you're not really my type. You yell at the television, you have holes in your socks, and you snore terribly. What? He jabbed a finger her direction. I only snored that one time when you made me watch Bridget Jones. It's a classic. No way. He popped open the soda and drank. It's like every other chick flick. Guy meets girl in some really corny way, girl wants guy, he plays it cool until he's bashed upside the head by some crazy feeling and calls it love. Chick. She gawked. You're such a downer. All those movies are the same. You've seen one of them, you've seen them all. He licked carbonation off his lip. How could I not fall asleep? It's not only chick flicks. She planted her hands on her hips and tried not to imagine sucking the carbonation off his lip the next time he took a drink. You snored through Avatar. Victory was hers. Okay, so my taste is limited to action and westerns. Sue me. He stopped mid drink. Back up. What do you mean I'm not your type? Am I really that horrible? No, I'm not as difficult to train as Bailey. I already know how to behave like a gentleman. He sat on the edge of a bar stool as Bailey whined. Look, I'm sitting, and you didn't even have to give me a treat. Oh, he was a sight. Shaggy brown hair that fell past his ears. Icy blue eyes. Peering beneath light lashes. Round face. Short forehead. Carter was cute too. Release, Faith said, and Bailey dropped the hot dog to the floor. She'd almost forgotten about the poor little pup. He chomped on the end, tossing it back into his mouth. He licked his chops and then stared at her expectantly. I'm sure any of the dozen women you've dated this year would be able to vouch on your behalf. She snatched the Coke from Carter's hand and stole a sip. Give me a break, he said, eyeing her as she drank. There haven't been a dozen. Oh yeah, there had been. Not for her though. Faith would have been happy to have a second date. Just one that went well enough to garner another. Her best friend Tracy had set her up a handful of times and things had never panned out well. Tracy couldn't exactly be faulted for setting Faith up with the wrong men. She didn't know Faith was a turned werewolf, able to shift at every full moon. And since the Seattle wolf pack lived secretly from the rest of the world, Faith couldn't exactly explain to her friend why she shouldn't date a non-shifter. There were werewolves in the pack who'd found their fated mate with a non-shifter, their alpha being one of them, but Faith couldn't picture herself explaining why she donned fangs and grew more body hair than a yeti. Dating werewolves wasn't easy either. They understood the pack dynamic and the differences between born and turned wolves. They even understood the concept of a luminary, or a wolf's one and only fated mate. But the one she'd dated over the last couple years had never stuck around long. Tracy said it had something to do with the walls Faith put up around herself and the way she never let anyone in. Faith couldn't help but feel like it had more to do with her looks. More specifically, the scar she couldn't hide. You picked the movie. Carter stood and hooked Bailey up to his leash. I promise I won't fall asleep. I won't torture you with leap year like I'd planned, Faith said, keeping the granite island between them. I'm not feeling up for it. Bad morning. His brows scrunched together. Phone calls from her little brother didn't always set her day off wrong, but this one had. It wasn't what he said on the message that had her worried, it was the cautious tone and the tremble in his voice. Dawson called this morning. I missed him because I was out walking Bailey, but his voice sounded strange on the message. Sometimes it's hard to tell from machines. Yeah. As she scratched her head, the phone rang, making her jump. She removed the cordless from its base on the counter and glanced at the screen. It's him. Carter nodded, and instead of leaving the way she thought he would, he moved around the island and plopped onto her couch. Making himself comfortable, he kicked an ankle on the opposite knee, situated the Coke between his legs, and peeled open the pages of the magazine on the coffee table. Guess he didn't feel the need for her to experience any privacy. She answered. Hey, Dawson. She shuffled around the island so she could watch Carter as she spoke. She simply liked looking at the man. What's up? Dawson called only when he was short on money. She worked 3 jobs to pay her younger brother's way through college, and oftentimes it wasn't enough. Mornings were devoted to walking dogs for people in the neighborhood. Afternoons were consumed by private dog training lessons, and evenings were spent in front of her computer creating her question and answer dog blog. Have a little faith. Don't freak out, her brother said. Then don't start conversations with that. She smacked her hand to her forehead. Spit it out. Do you know that professor I've been studying under for the last year? The communications one? She peeked at Carter from between her fingers. He grinned. She frowned. I don't know how you manage to remember every minuscule detail of my life. You must take notes when I call. Something crinkled on the other side of the line. She wants me to go with her to a conference in San Jose next weekend. Faith sighed. That's great. Yeah, Dawson said, sounding like his cheeks were full of something gummy. But it's $3,000. Faith did a mental check of her body. No, not bleeding money. Yet. How important is it? She asked. Professor Reynolds said if I pick up the concepts at the conference I could be her intern for the rest of the semester. He cleared his throat. She's amazing, Faithy. You should see what she can do with something simple like PhotoZone. Oh, now we're getting down to it. Faith strode into the living room and plopped beside Carter. He turned his attention to her, draping his arm over the back of the couch. When she didn't acknowledge him, he playfully kicked her foot. She kicked him back in the shin. Just how amazing is she? It's not like that. It's an opportunity to meet people on the cutting edge of the business. There's a big group of us going. What else? She asked. There's more, isn't there? You're good, he said. Better than Mom and Dad were. Spill. As if on cue, Bailey barked and nuzzled his head between Carter's legs. Carter lifted the magazine and spilled soda all over his crotch. Damn it, he hollered, jumping off the couch. Bailey, I want to go for my MFA in graphic design. Faith heard Dawson say over Carter's grumbles. At Yale. I found out I was accepted yesterday. Professor Reynolds encouraged me to apply in the fall. I didn't want to tell you before. I knew if I'd gotten in and... Whoa, hold the phone. Did you say Yale? Faith's skin went pinprickly, and she stopped staring at Carter's wet crotch. I'm feeling faint. Carter froze, hands out from his sides. You okay? She waved him off. I got in, Dawson went on. I actually did it. That's great, Dawson. I'm thrilled for you. Then why did she feel as if a pile of bricks had settled on her shoulders? She leaned forward and slumped a little. Did you apply anywhere else? I want Yale, Faith. He sounded sincere. Pained. I really want it, but even with my job, grants and loans, it won't be enough to cover books, tuition, and my living expenses. I'm going to need your help. She sighed. I know. You don't have to say any more. Images of dollar signs and massive amounts of green dough spun through her head. She'd be paying off his student loans forever. She'd never get on her feet. Guilt soured her stomach as those horrible thoughts trickled in. Dawson had graduated high school as valedictorian, and then majored in design at WSU just like their father had. Going to Yale, continuing in their father's footsteps, probably made Dawson feel closer to him. If she could help him reach that dream, she would. She threw herself back against the cushions, laid her head back and closed her eyes. I'll deposit the cash in your account first thing in the morning. Go to the conference and we'll talk when you get back. She was going to need a winning lottery ticket to get out of this mess. Seriously, he screeched. You're the best. I know. Love you, dude. Love you too. She ended the call, fell over, and screamed into the couch cushion. You okay? Carter said through her scream. She looked up at him and nodded. Nothing too major. Good. Then I'll let you have your mental breakdown in peace. I'm going to head home and change, Carter said, dragging Bailey out the door, his arm covering the wet spot on his pants. I'll pick the movie tomorrow night. And I'm bringing something harder than beer. You're a good friend, she said. But every second of every day she wished he was something. Chapter 2. When Carter awoke the next morning, he was still thinking about Faith and the phone call she'd had with her brother. It had bothered him. Probably more than it should have, since her family dynamic was none of his business. Dawson had asked for money, and of course she'd send it to him. She always did. She was warmly generous that way. Carter hated someone taking advantage of her kindness, even if that someone was her only living blood relative. He'd see her tonight for their movie ritual. Maybe he'd ask her why she didn't just tell Dawson to stand on his own 2 feet. He strode through the doors of the Enforcement Bureau's building and checked his watch. 5 minutes until his meeting with the captain. The Bureau was the Seattle Wolfpack's policing unit. They closely watched the werewolves roaming the streets of Seattle, made sure they were lying low, obeying all the laws, both city and pack, and not committing crimes that would get their kind noticed by the non-shifting portion of the population. Not a bad job for a werewolf. Carter had worked on the streets as an enforcer for the last 10 years. But with a little luck, all of that was about to change. Veins thrumming with excitement, Carter marched through the marble-floored lobby, punched the button on the elevator, and let it sweep him to the top floor. The doors opened up to an ocean-themed flat with desks, chairs, and leather couches facing a window that looked out over the city. There were 2 people on the floor. A secretary poised in front of the captain's office and Nate Ramsey, another member of the Enforcement Bureau. Carter Griffin, the secretary said when he checked in. Take a seat and I'll let the captain know you finally arrived. Finally. Carter checked his watch. It's 10 sharp. I'm not late. You're not early. Damn, Carter mumbled. The captain doesn't mess around. He took one of the leather couches outside the door and glanced at Nate. Good to see you, Nate said, leaning forward to clasp his hands over his knees. How you been? Nate was a 100-year-old werewolf, a few years younger than Carter. He'd been with the Bureau the same amount of time and had spent a decent amount of time on the road. He must have been applying for the position of detective, too. And why wouldn't he? It was the most respected position on the force. Well enough. Carter eyed Nate's tie. It was crooked. He double-checked his own. You can't complain. Nate scraped his hands over his skull-trim cut. You here? For the detective position. Nodding, Carter rested his elbows on his knees. You're golden. If I knew you were putting in for the position, I wouldn't have bothered. Don't cut yourself short, Carter said. You're more than qualified. And now Carter had some serious competition. If he'd been confident about getting the detective position before, not that he was, of course, those feelings were long gone now. Nate Ramsey was a great enforcer. How Captain Rich was going to make this decision was beyond him. Mr. Griffin, Mr. Ramsey, the secretary said, hanging up the phone. He'll see you both now. Tugging down his sleeves so the tattoos on his arms wouldn't peek out the bottom, Carter strode ahead of Nate, through the double doors leading to the captain's office. The room shared the same ocean theme as the foyer, only the colors were darker, muted, and warmer. Carter knew better than to make himself comfortable, though. Captain Rich was 220 pounds of authority in a gray suit and tie and a crisp white shirt that stretched tautly over his shoulders. From what Carter had heard, their superior was a born werewolf 600 years old and had created the Bureau from the ground up. Please, Captain Rich said, spreading his arms to the chairs in front of his desk. Sit. Carter took the seat on the left and Nate took the one next to him. The captain sat in his wingback chair and flipped open 2 folders on his desk. He scanned through their contents, and then eyed them both carefully. You've both been on the road the same amount of time, give or take a few months. He tented his fingers together and glared at them with eerie black eyes. You've both progressed up the ranks, earning top marks from your sergeants. You take any overtime shifts available. You volunteer for professional development every time an opportunity arises. Professionally speaking, you're both primed for the position of detective. Were they going to bend the rules and accept both? Nate kicked the side of Carter's chair as if he'd read his excitement. But your personal resumes are just as important in determining which one of you will fill our vacancy. We're not only a policing force within the pack. We're a family. There are hundreds of enforcers on our payroll and each of them is an important piece of the family unit. However, he said, standing, promoted positions like sergeant, lieutenant, captain, detective, and special ops make up the backbone of the wolf pack. We have formed a council filled with these high-ranking positions. He faced the window wall behind him and clasped his hands behind his back. Rain beat against the windows, matching the drumming of Carter's heart. He forced himself to calm, but couldn't rid himself of the feeling that the storm was about to break. Once a month, Captain Rich went on, this council meets and discusses how to run the rest of the bureau more effectively. We believe significant others have a role to play as well, since you will go home to talk about your day and Wolfpack business to the mate who warms your bed. Carter had heard about retreats for high-ranking officials. He'd also heard it was a family affair, but he'd figured it was more like a company picnic than a meeting on Wolfpack business. The captain spun around and leveled them with a serious glare. We're looking for stability, gentlemen. We're more likely to vote on a mated pair than a lone wolf. Wait, what? Tension crept up his spine. He didn't have a mate. Well, he corrected, he'd had one and she died. He fit the textbook definition of lone wolf. Did that mean he wasn't in contention for the position? With all due respect, sir, Carter said, hands clamming. What does relationship status have to do with the ability to be a detective? What do you think would happen if we chose a serial dater to take on the position? Casual significant others could be privy to all kinds of information on the inner workings of our bureau. If the couple split, as we'd expect, we'd be put in a precarious situation. Multiply this by multiple mates and we've got a major problem on our hands. The captain paused, his gaze raking over them. According to your files, neither of you two are married. That's correct, isn't it? Carter got the feeling that this was one of those make-or-break moments. The split second when he'd either get the job of his dreams or be left working the streets for the next 100 years. I'm not married, sir, Nate said, but I've found my luminary. We'll be married and bonded next weekend. The werewolf bonding process was much like a marriage ceremony, but instead of linking people for life, it extended the wolves' lives from a few hundred to 1,000 years. Thanks to the bond, both the male and female wolf gained strength and speed. The process itself had to be performed during sex when they were linked body to body, hand to hand, soul to soul. Sacred words were spoken, joining their souls. Not every wolf found their luminary, their one and only fated mate, and ones who did were considered blessed. Well done. Congratulations to you both. The captain shifted his attention to Carter. And you? Are our records properly updated? Carter's stomach dropped. He'd found his luminary when he was a newly transitioned wolf. That was over 50 years ago, before their love faded. Their marriage failed and she died. The luminary bond was supposed to be amazing, sunshine and rainbows and all that BS. They must have done it wrong. And now he was destined to roam the world alone. Without his dream job, apparently. He needed this promotion and he would have been damn good at it. There were cases in the bureau that needed to be revisited, closed cases that deserved to be reopened and reanalyzed. Murders needed to be solved. Suspects needed to be questioned. As a simple enforcer, he followed orders. Period. He was more than ready to lead. I'm in the same position as Nate. Carter swallowed hard and hoped they didn't see him sweat. Because lying didn't come easy. Never had, never would. But too much rode on getting this position. I've found my fated mate, but neither of us wants a big wedding. We plan to elope as soon as our schedules allow. The captain's gaze flipped between them. Then it looks like I have two candidates for the position who are on equal footing. We're having the monthly council meeting Sunday night. We'd like you to bring your fiancés. Carter nearly choked on his own saliva. Sunday night, as in 2 days from now. You got it. Captain Rich grinned, his smile a bit too forced. It'll be the perfect opportunity for the council to meet you before they vote. Oh shit. Leave your numbers with my secretary and she'll text you both directions to the Owens' home, the captain said, shaking both of their hands. We'll decide which couple is a better fit after our meeting. Yes, sir. Carter bowed out of the office ahead of Nate, before the captain asked him for his fiancée's name, because he didn't have one to give. Chapter 3. That night, at Faith's request, Carter brought over vodka and cranberry juice. He watched as she poured one drink, downed it, and poured another before he'd even put in the movie. She still seemed to be upset about the phone call she'd had with her brother yesterday. Maybe this time it went deeper than money. During the previews, Carter relayed the whole story about the interview for the detective position. Hold the phone, Faith said, as she curled into the corner of her couch. You're getting married? I'd be getting married if I had a bride, a fiancée, or a girlfriend, but I've got none of the above. And I lied to the captain's face, flat out told him I was engaged. I'm screwed, right? He slouched down into the love seat, kicked up his foot on the coffee table, and took a hard drink. Royally screwed. Aren't you still with? She waved her hand around her face and her eyes fluttered closed. The alcohol was already setting in. Paisley? She was pretty. I was never with Paisley officially, so it's hard to say that it ended, but I won't be seeing her anymore. What happened? He didn't want to rehash it. Not tonight. Didn't work out. Let's leave it at that. What are you going to do? She asked softly. No clue. I'm open to suggestions. I always think better with food. She heaved herself off the couch and stubbed her toe on the corner as she headed into the kitchen. A drawer squeaked open. She rummaged for something and reappeared seconds later with a bag of tortilla chips and a gigantic tub of salsa. She popped the top, poured the salsa into a pink dotted bowl, and opened the bag of chips, spinning it his direction. Dig in. A woman after his own heart. Only he never let women close enough to get there. Well, he let Faith see sides of him that others didn't, but she was a friend, so she didn't count. When he'd first moved into his new place and heard that a female werewolf lived next door, he'd come to introduce himself right away. He found her attractive, with chestnut-colored hair layered around her face, and wide, innocent brown eyes, but there was no spark between them. He didn't have the urge to impress her like he did with the other women he dated, and he didn't get the feeling that she was interested in him in return. So they'd become friends, and he'd really come to enjoy their banter. He could relax with Faith, unlike the other girls he let into his life. Besides, if he dated her, it would end the way it always did. He'd work long hours, piss her off, and inevitably become an insensitive ass, at least. That's what he'd been told. It'd ruin everything. Vodka, chips, and salsa. King's meal right here. He shoved a chip into his mouth, wondering as he often did what Faith would look like in wolf form. Her fur would probably be the color of chestnut, matching her hair, and her coat would probably be sleek and smooth. But would she be soft and delicate in wolf form or bulky and strong? Thanks for the grub, but this doesn't help me. Faith emptied her second drink and wagged a chip his direction. There's only one solution to your problem. We've got to find you a fake fiancé. What? You need to get engaged. Now. Here. She turned to the back of a magazine and ripped out the last page. Let's make a list of prospects. Let's not, Carter said, laughing. Faith's idea was whack. He couldn't get engaged. No way, no how. Maybe he could come up with a fake fiancé for the party on Sunday and what? Have her fake die by Monday? Faith ignored him. Okay, Paisley's obviously out. What about the girl you were with before her? Lorene, Carter said, remembering. Great. She grinned, triumphant. Not happening. He chomped into a chip. She's pregnant by her new man. Faith clapped. Instant family. Perfect. Oh yeah, he said, mumbling. Wife and child. Just add water. If you think water is what's needed to make a child, you've got something to learn. Giggling, she bumped him in the shoulder and fell into a mound of pillows. Remind me not to get near you, and a water bottle. God, she was cute when she laughed. Oh, you dated what's her pretty face before that? Gemma. She gasped, jerked upright, and then scribbled Gemma's name. But wait, didn't she cheat on you? That wasn't exactly the way it went down. Carter had gotten the vibe that Gemma was going to cheat, staying out late, ignoring his phone calls, standing dates with the girls. So he'd ended it before she could It was the same story over and over again. After his luminary died, he dated other women, and had even thought about getting married again. He'd heard about lone wolves marrying others after their mates passed on, but he couldn't do it. Not out of loyalty to his deceased mate. She didn't have the same loyalty during their marriage, but because he simply didn't have the patience to build anything with anyone else. She didn't cheat, but it wasn't far off. Carter poured another drink, this one straight vodka. The cranberry was too sweet for his taste. I don't think any of my exes will. After it's over, they won't. How do I put it? Faith nodded as if she understood. You don't think they'll like you enough to do this for you? Not without a stiff bribe. She snorted when he said stiff. The last thing I want is to get hooked up again, even if it's fake. He scrubbed his hands through his hair. There's got to be another way. Yes, you could tell your captain the truth, she said, swiveling toward him. You could say you told a little white lie and happily worked the road for the rest of your life. Not so bad, right? He paused, weighing his options. Right. Or you could leave your ego at the door and say your fiancé doesn't want you to take the job. You want me to admit that I let a woman dictate my career choices? He shook his head, thoughts whirring. Don't think so. No one would believe it. Besides, that still leaves me without the job I've killed myself for. She pursed her lips in that adorable way of hers. Then you have to get engaged. There had to be another way, didn't there? Seconds dragged by, stretching into minutes. The rainstorm that had been pummeling Seattle beat against Faith's cabin windows, storming into a crescendo that had Carter zoning out, listening. Realization struck like a lightning bolt. There was no going back. If I did this, I'd want it to be over as quickly as possible. The council meeting is Sunday, so this thing could be over Monday, he said. Tuesday at the latest. This thing? It's an engagement, Casanova. Faith whacked him with the remote and accidentally changed the channel. No wonder you're single. You really think they'll buy that? Frantically punching remote buttons, she accidentally turned the TV off. Instead of figuring out how to turn it back on, she first narrowed her eyes at the screen and then at him. Won't they think it's strange that you're with someone for the weekend but are single by the start of your first shift? Never thought about it. So you think it's got to extend beyond the week? His throat scratched. A long engagement. A month. She shoved a chip in her mouth and shook her head. A year, he offered, his throat drying to sandpaper. I thought you said the council thing you wanted a mated pair, she said, finishing off her drink. You might have to actually marry her. Stars danced in front of his eyes and his vision zoomed in and out. Where was a paper bag when you needed one? If you end things too quickly, she said, couldn't they just fire you? They could, but I'll prove them wrong. I'll be an asset to the bureau on my own. As thunder rumbled outside, the lights flickered. Oh yeah, a power outage would top the cake on this perfect day. Then they wouldn't be able to watch the movie, they'd have to call it a night, and he wouldn't get his Faith fix. He couldn't explain how it happened, but she made him feel that an impossible situation was possible. He felt relaxed around her, like he could conquer the world and this insane plan would actually work. Worst case scenario, he said, swallowing hard, would be a long engagement. That turns into a wedding to prove I'm serious with this chick. How long would I have to fake it? She made a sweet little sound in the back of her throat and something in his gut twisted. Not sure. 6 months? A year? Images of wolves in the wild gnawing off their legs to escape traps flashed through his mind. Okay, if I did that, the bureau would have to let me keep my position. Divorces happen. They'd have to understand. By the end of a year I'd be firmly rooted in their family. But if whoever I pick gets greedy or spiteful about the way you broke it off with her last time, Faith interrupted, stealing his drink and taking a hearty swig. Right, he continued. I could lose everything I'm doing this thing for. I don't know what you're going to do, or what I'm going to do. She hiccuped and patted her chest. If I don't figure something out, all of this could go. He tried to piece together her meaning, but her words were fuddling around. What? She closed her eyes as she spoke. Dawson got into Yale. Yale. Can you believe it? Yale is a weird word. Say it. Yale. 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 He laughed, watching her say the word over and over again, her lips puckering in and out like a fish. He liked drunk Faith. A lot. Yale, he said, nodding. That's great. And that's a good thing, right? New. She wagged her finger, and he imagined her in wolf form, tail swishing back and forth, her ears perked up playfully. Not a good thing. Now they were getting down to the reason she'd been so upset yesterday. I don't understand, he said, watching her features turn solemn. Why is Dawson going to Yale a problem? She leaned forward, planting her hand on the coffee table for balance. Her eyes were coffee brown and getting glossier by the second. He's my responsibility. Oh, that's a tough word to say when your tongue's numb. Responsibility. Why? She grinned when she got it right, all traces of sadness gone. If he wants Yale, I've got to pay for it. Carter felt his brow furrow. Doesn't he have a job? Full-time one. I got 3. She fumbled to hold up 3 fingers. Still not enough. Our dad went to Yale. Did I tell you that? He shook his head. Yup. Dawson wants to be just like him. That's not surprising. He was a great man. Carter remembered Faith telling him about the way their parents had died. They were non-shifters killed during a home invasion gone wrong. Their dad had tried to protect them, but he didn't stand a chance against a werewolf. Dawson probably feels closer to your dad when he walks in his shoes. Oh, I know that, she said, rolling her eyes. You're right, Of course you're right. Oh yeah, she was drunk. Well, 2 drinks and half of his made her more tipsy than drunk. But still, no woman told a man he was right 3 times in a row, or at all ever, without being a little out of her mind. Gazing far off, Faith brushed her hand over the scar on her neck, as if the mere mention of her father had brought the memories of the tragic event to the surface. In the attack, Dawson and Faith had been bitten, turned into wolves, and left for dead. Joining the Seattle Wolf Pack had saved them. Carter had no idea Faith had been supporting her brother financially. No wonder she worked 3 jobs and didn't have much to show for it. So you need Yale tuition. He dropped back into the couch cushions, stroking the condensation dripping off his glass. You're in a pickle. You want one? Her eyebrows perked up, though her eyes weren't tracking well. I think I have a jar in the fridge. What? No. Faith, I meant never mind. He scraped his hands through his hair. An idea sparked. You still not dating anyone? He said. It wasn't a question. He kept a close eye on her love life, though he didn't know why the interest was so intense. Me. Laughing, she scooped up another chip full of salsa. She missed her mouth. What do you think? Men were stupid. Faith was a sweetheart and pretty in a natural, classic kind of way. Perfect for any man who didn't turn relationships toxic. Plus she was loyal and honest and would never stab her lover in the back. He slid to the edge of the couch, his path suddenly clear. This was his only chance. Sunday was 2 short days away. Faith, I have a proposition. Chapter 4. Marry me, Carter said. Her smile fell. At least Faith thought it did. Her lips had gone numb. What? Me? No. She backpedaled. You don't want to do that. Let's go through the list of your gazillion ex-girlfriends. Jealousy soured her stomach. Every Friday night, she listened to stories about his werewolf girlfriends, how beautiful and successful they were. He didn't talk about them to make her feel inferior, but she did. Their skin was probably milky white, smooth and perfect from face to foot. She bet they weren't marred like she was. Yeah, we already exhausted that list. Carter grinned from the side of his mouth, causing a tiny dimple to form on his right cheek. She poked at it, but he dodged and tapped her hand away. The bureau caught me at a bad time, but I have a solution. Her pulse raced. Marrying me is not a solution. Sure it is. No, it'd be crazy and exciting. Something she dreamed about on more than one occasion. But this wasn't how she'd envisioned a proposal. Not even close. He should have been on bended knee, in front of their friends and family, at least that's how she'd always pictured it. He should have been declaring his undying love, not talking about a phony baloney engagement and sham marriage. And what about her luminary? Werewolves could fall in love and marry whomever they wanted. But once in a lifetime they met their soul mate and were forever changed. They became stronger and faster, and their sense of loyalty increased. For that one mate. Some wolves never found their one and only fated mate, and others refused to marry until they did. Faith was open to both falling in love and waiting until she found her Luminary, but this went against everything. This wasn't even love. This was a business arrangement. Don't worry, Faith. It would be in name only, Carter said, grabbing for her hand. It wouldn't be real. Oh yeah, that made her feel better. She was going to be sick. Carter, I want to get married. But I want it to happen with someone who loves me. Where's the romance in this? He blanched. You want romance? You really don't know women at all, do you? He shrugged. I know you. And I know you love your brother more than anything. You'd do anything to see him succeed. He had her there. Carter scooted to the floor and knelt, leaning over the seat cushion next to her. I'll pay Dawson's tuition. The whole thing. Holy shit. The offer floored her. You can't. The blood drained from her face and her hands went all tingly. It's too much. Not right. Look what you'd be giving up for me, he said, his tone turning tender. You'll be going to council dinners and putting on a show that we're a couple. We're going to have to spend more time together. I don't mind spending time with you, Carter. She leaned in close. I like you way more than she should. I like you too. That's why this is going to work. I'll get the detective position, he said, his light eyes sparkling with enthusiasm. Your brother gets to go to Yale and you don't go broke paying for it. All you'd have to do is go to the party with me on Sunday. I'll introduce you as my fiancé. We'll stay engaged for a while, and if they start pressuring me about the wedding date, we'll just get married at City Hall. You won't even have to move in with me since we live so close. You can stay here and I'll stay at my place. When I convince the council that I'm just as valuable on my own, I'll say we split. We can get a quickie divorce. Married at City Hall? Quickie divorce? Swoon. She fell back against the couch and tried to slow her thoughts. She wanted Dawson to go to Yale more than she'd ever wanted anything, and she liked Carter. He was her very best friend. He worked hard and had been dreaming of this promotion since she met him. The two leading men in her life needed her. But what would she be giving up to do this? Her dreams of a fairy tale wedding? How much did she really want that? I'm dizzy, she said, zoning out on the television. She needed a distraction. Fumbling about, she found the remote and clicked the TV back on. What movie did you bring? Please, Carter whispered, resting his hand on her thigh. Faith. She looked at him and her heart pinched. Why couldn't he touch her like this? And mean it? Why couldn't she have been his luminary? All of this would have been so easy. But he'd already found his fated mate and had lost her. That loss must have been devastating for him. She couldn't imagine finding the one you love only to lose them and then have to walk the world alone. She couldn't imagine her life without Carter, whether he was a lover or a friend. Suddenly she realized, between her dreams of a fairy tale wedding and being with Carter, that she wanted the latter more. I need this, he said. I need you. Hell. How could she say no now? She held his gaze. Again, what movie did you bring? I might not want to hitch my wagon to a star with no taste. He grinned slowly, keeping his hand on her thigh. Her skin warmed, blooming into a tingly blush. It's so I married an ex-murderer. Good pick. Love this guy. She fell over and clutched a throw pillow against her chest. She sighed and said, Fine. I'll marry you. Carter slid onto the couch and dragged her legs over his lap. The dynamic between them was comfortable, as if she'd just told him she wanted butter on her popcorn. But the emotions running through her body were hot and jumpy, on high alert. Her thigh was tingly where his hand touched it, her stomach was spinning and she couldn't feel her lips at all. Beyond that, a hollow feeling in the pit of her stomach warned that this wouldn't work out how she hoped it would. Maybe the pit would go away with some food. Now that she thought about it, popcorn with butter sounded amazing. So, when you said you'd marry me, Carter said as the movie started, were you talking to me or Mike Myers? Both. She giggled into a hiccup. But you asked first, so you get dibs. Lucky you. I'm quite the prize. He laughed. Thanks, Faith. This means a ton. I know. She rested her head on the back of the couch, feeling as if every pound of the ton he spoke of was weighing heavy on her heart. I know. Chapter 5. Faith woke up to the sound of her Keurig coffee maker spouting heavenly syrup into a cup. Rays of morning light broke through her blinds and shone in her eyes, blinding her. She peeked around her living room through partly opened lids. Even though Carter wasn't in sight, her heightened senses picked up his scent. Had he left his coat behind when he went home last night? Was that the scent she was picking up? Hello. No, Carter was actually in her cabin. She looked up to see him peek his head around the wall separating her living room from her kitchen. He looked rested, his light eyes bright, every hair falling in place. God, she probably looked like a troll. Hey, I'm stealing a cup of coffee. His voice was so deep and rich it was nearly a growl. Hope you don't mind. No, I don't. She sat upright, and the blanket covering her body slid to the floor. Carter must have covered her after she fell asleep last night. That was nice of him. Help yourself. She rubbed her eyes and smoothed down her hair. Want me to make breakfast? You? Cook. He laughed. Let's not and say we did, and that it was delicious. What? She hollered. I can cook. Ramen doesn't count. Damn it. She folded her arms over her chest and stuck her tongue out at him as he disappeared into the kitchen once more. Suddenly reality set in. Carter never came over this early on Saturday morning. Bits and pieces of the previous night clumped together in her brain. Why are you? She turned to peek out her front window. His truck was parked in her driveway. Did you stay the night? Don't you remember? He brought out 2 cups of coffee in giant Disney mugs and handed her Goofy, then moved a heap of blankets and sat beside her. Last night was great. His voice was melted honey, rich and smooth, tingling her in all the right places. But then his words registered and her emotions flipped on a dime. If they slept together, it had been a mistake. No, she corrected smugly. The mistake would have been that she was too drunk to remember it. Did she feel different? Wouldn't she have been able to tell if she and Carter had slept together? She would have been sore. Blissfully, wonderfully sore. We didn't. How to put it? Tell me we didn't. He busted out laughing. Of course Carter hadn't made a move. Of course they hadn't slept together. Not his type. You're not his type. Disappointment streamed through her, but she buried it with anger. She smacked him in the chest. Hey, watch it. Carter recovered, guarding the Mickey mug with his other hand. I spilled soda on your couch the day before yesterday. If I spill coffee today, you might make me buy you a new one. His eyebrows danced. Or maybe that's your plan. This thing looks haggard. Ignoring him completely, Faith sipped the veranda blend coffee and moaned when the creaminess hit her tongue. He'd put French vanilla creamer in it, just the way she liked. She couldn't help but wonder if he was an attentive lover. You fell asleep, he said, his words a sexy drawl. I covered you up and locked the door on my way out. His scent clung to the blanket, to the couch. What she wouldn't give to have his scent cling to her skin. How'd you get back in? She asked. Use the key you hide above the door. Okay, he was sweet but way too observant. Damn cops. Do you remember anything about last night? He asked. Her stomach churned as memories of the night before swam into mental view. Oh. She recalled a few things. How could she forget? She took a solid gulp of her coffee. I remember vodka, an axe murderer, and a marriage proposal. Good. The important things. He nodded. What do you think? You're serious? Why not? Because it's crazy. Hasn't the light of day knocked some sense into you? She suddenly had the urge to pace. Taking her coffee with her, she pushed off from the couch and headed out the front door onto the porch. The morning air was crisp and cold, typical for January, with a misty rain moving through the trees. It felt better out here, she could breathe easier. Her porch stretched the entire length of her house and wrapped around the side. She walked the length and back, thinking about Carter's predicament, her brother's tuition, and her options, and why she'd ultimately decided to say yes. By the time Carter joined her outside, she felt better about the whole thing. Barely, but the time away from him helped. I want to pay you back, she said finally, leaning against the railing. If you cover Dawson's tuition for now, that's fine, but I want to pay you back when I can. Deal. Carter settled onto the wooden porch swing facing her and kicked his feet against the deck to get it moving. He had a kind of powerful grace that struck Faith when he was doing the simplest of things like pushing a wooden swing. He'd be lethal in wolf form, no doubt. As long as you know that you don't have to pay me back for anything. I'd gladly cover his tuition for what you're doing for me. Like to be doing a lot of other things for you, to you, whatever. She nodded slowly, took a deep breath and pushed dirty thoughts of Carter out of her mind. Aren't you the least bit worried that the council is going to see through this? I'm not like your other girlfriends. I'm going to have to pretend to be somebody completely different to make this believable. The thought saddened her, though she didn't know why. I don't think you should be anyone but you. That's the only way this will work. He kicked his feet out and back, his jeans pulling taut over his legs. As he stretched them out, do you want a wedding? Her coffee was fresh, but it wasn't bold enough for this discussion. Dawson's the only family I have, and I'd really rather him not know about the arrangement. Wouldn't want him to feel like he's a burden. He knows I'm not dating anyone, so announcing an engagement would send up a bunch of red flags. It'll be better if he doesn't know. Understood. What about you? Do you have any family to warn about an upcoming nuptial? I have a sister who lives in Chicago and a half-brother in Greece. He sipped on his coffee. They didn't come to my first wedding, so I don't see why they'd care about my second. She was curious about his first marriage and his first wife, but now wasn't the time to ask. Now that she thought about it, he didn't talk much about his parents, his siblings, or his love life. What about your parents? Faith asked. They were both born wolves. That was all she'd been told. Will they be interested in knowing about an engagement or upcoming wedding? My parents died 50 years ago. Oh, she said. I didn't know that. What about your friends? Anyone in the pack you're close to? Oh yeah, I've got hundreds of friends. He smirked. But none measure up to you. Put your big game away, Casanova. I've got enough sweetness in my coffee. Why did he insist on toying with her emotions? So what's our story? We should work out the kinks before tomorrow night. He stepped off the swing and joined her at the railing, peering out into the yard. The sun peeked through the canopy of fur above them, picking up subtle highlights in his dark hair. Why'd he have to be so good-looking? It'd be easier to see him as a friend, and only a friend, if he didn't have the whole sexy yet dangerous Colin Farrell vibe going on. I think we should stick to the basics, keeping as true as we can to how we really met. We should say I moved in next door to you last year and we hit it off right away. You knew from the moment you saw my rugged good looks that I was the one for you. Oh yeah. She groaned and rolled her eyes. That's exactly how it happened. Think you couldn't keep your dirty paws off my bodacious bod? He turned, leaning back against the railing. You do have curves for days. Despite the way he was playfully ogling her body, she knew full well he didn't like women with soft stomachs and a little something extra on their hips. The women he dated were rail skinny and had somehow discovered a way to make every ounce of fat on their body suck to their breasts. Even in wolf form, she had a little bit of meat to her. She wasn't one of those dainty wolves who looked like she could be tossed around by her mate. No, Faith was bigger than the average female, and stronger. She stood upright and flattened her shirt down her stomach. We should set up other rules too. He nodded. Like what? I don't think you should be able to date anyone while you're dating me. She chose her words carefully. If the council thinks I'm your wife and they see you around town with someone else, that would reflect on me. That's fair. He emptied his cup. I won't date anyone until this is over. But if I can't date anyone, you shouldn't be able to either. Tip for that and all that stuff. Gosh, now I'll have to cancel all my dates and I'll be making phone calls all day. She'd sked. Somehow I think I'll manage that part. Any other rules you want to set up while we're on the subject? He nailed her with a glare that sizzled the blood in her veins. Honesty first and foremost. I won't be lied to. Good, because she didn't want to be lied to either. More importantly though, she didn't want to look stupid in any way, shape, or form. She'd had enough of that when she was younger, when the kids in school would make fun of the scar on her neck. Then when she thought she'd put the past behind her and finally accepted the permanent marking her ex-boyfriend had thrown it in her face. Look at you, he'd said during their very public breakup. You're more beast than beauty. All I see when I look at you is a cut that didn't go deep enough. She'd broken up with him after he said it. Actually, that was an understatement. She'd thrown her drink in his face and then broken his nose with a left jab. But she heard the gasps and whispers from other patrons in the restaurant long after she'd left. The memory of that moment had her cheeks burning and her stomach churning with hatred. He'd been an asshat to say such a thing, and she hadn't thought much about him since, but the feeling of being humiliated that way publicly still hurt. She took a deep breath to calm herself down. I won't lie to you, she said. And one more rule. You will not make me feel like a fool. Deal. He extended his hand and she took it. His skin was rough but warm. It wasn't the marriage proposal she'd been dreaming of since she was a little girl, even though the man himself was pretty darn close to what she'd imagined. Her hunky groom-to-be. When's the wedding? She asked, taking back her hand. Their contact didn't seem to faze him one bit. Do we have to decide right now? Can't we be engaged for a while first? We can, but when a couple gets engaged, they usually start planning. Absent-mindedly, she rubbed the spot on her left hand where he would put a wedding band. If we have a date in mind, it'll look more realistic. He nodded, agreeing. 6 months from now sounds vague enough. Sometime. In June or July. That'll work. His gaze caught on her hand. I completely forgot. You'll need an engagement ring for tomorrow night's dinner. A warm blush fanned over her cheeks. No, I don't think. I've got to run. He set the mug on the railing and swept down the steps to the front yard before she could stop him. See you tomorrow morning? Around 10. She frowned. What's happening in the morning? We're going through your closet to pick what you're going to wear for dinner. I'm fully capable of choosing my own clothes. He turned back at his driver's door. When was the last time you wore something other than jeans and Converse? And yoga pants don't count. Damn. Everything about tomorrow night has to be perfect. I'm not leaving anything to chance. He slid into his truck, rolled down the passenger window and leaned across the bench seat. See you tomorrow, wifey. The coffee in her stomach tumbled at the name. Oh God. Was she ready for this? She checked her watch. She had 2 dogs to pick up for walks in 15 minutes and another 3 shortly after that. And since she'd forgotten to update her blog last night, she'd have to squeeze that somewhere into her day. She bolted into her house, snatched her cell, and called her best friend Tracy. For back, Chapter 6. Bright and early Sunday morning, Faith eyed Carter as he strode through her living room door, a Starbucks cup in his hand. He looked completely relaxed in a black t-shirt and jeans with holes in the knees. It wasn't every day he exposed his sleeve tattoos this way either. They wrapped around his wrists and snaked up his arm in all shapes and colors. The urge to lift his sleeve and trace the dark lines over his shoulder struck her hard. You ready for today? Ready as I'll ever be. Faith checked the clock. When she called Tracy last night, her friend had said she'd show up first thing Sunday morning to help pick out an outfit. Tracy was perpetually late. Blast. Faith would have felt a lot better about this whole thing with Tracy's opinion. Carter said he'd help, but outside of white cotton t-shirts and jeans, he had little fashion sense. Faith knelt near the travel kennel that had been dropped off just before Carter showed up and bent to peer inside. A tiny black and white ball of fur huddled in the corner. What's in the crate? He asked, perching on the edge of a bar stool. She unlatched the gate, swung it open, and reached inside. It's a male black and antique Yorkie. Pets and Paws Animal Shelter didn't have room for him, and didn't want to send him to another shelter where he might have been euthanized. Are you fostering him? For a while. Faith smiled as her fingers sank into silky soft fur. She wrapped her hand around its delicate frame. The shelter had her number on file as a volunteer foster if they filled up. She took on adoptable dogs from time to time. Someone will want this little guy, so he'll stay here until the shelter or I can find him a good home. She pulled out the pup. Here he is. She cupped him in her hands and held him against her. He was soft and warm, cuddling up against her. But as she turned to show Carter, the dog squirmed and fought to get out of her arms. Easy there, she whispered. Easy. I think they dropped off the wrong animal, he said. That's a rat. No, it's a teacup. They're supposed to be this small. Laughing, Faith fought to control the black and white ball of fur. This guy doesn't seem to want to be held. Gently she set the dog down. It scurried to Carter's side like its fur was on fire and latched onto the tip of his boot. It pumped furiously, its petite backside doing an erratic version of the Humpty dance. What the hell? Carter gave the dog a little shake. Run all the way over here for a quick hump. The puppy wouldn't shake off. Looks like he likes you, Faith said. Must be those rugged good looks you were talking about. Shut Carter wiggled his foot around. Up. Come. Faith ordered. She patted her leg. Puppy, come. Could you say something else? Carter leveled her with a flat stare. Call him by name. He doesn't have one. She walked across the living room and scooped up the horny pooch. He stared at Carter, a crazed look in his tiny brown eyes. Since you two are so close now, I think you should name him. Nah, I'll leave that to you. He reached out and petted the puppy, stroking his hands over his black and white splotched coat. Did you get something formal to wear tonight? Did you? I'm wearing a tux. Fancy. When the pooch stopped panting, she tucked him under her arm and carried him into her bedroom. This time Carter didn't follow. I called Tracy over to give a woman's opinion on what to wear, she called out. She should be here any minute. The sound of tires over gravel stirred through the house. On the money, Carter said from the living room. Did you tell her about the arrangement? Cradling the pooch with one hand, Faith opened her closet with the other, yanked out the fanciest clothes she had and tossed them on her bed. No, I told her that you asked me out. You're taking me somewhere swanky tonight. Sounds good. The door creaked open. The pooch yapped and squirmed to get free. He'd have to work on his mounting issues. Too bad some of that pent-up sexual energy couldn't be transferred from dogs to werewolves. She knew of one in particular. To give it to... Hey Carter, Faith heard Tracy say. How've you been? Well enough. It's about time you asked Faith out. She's been... Tracy, Faith hollered, and then stuck her head around the corner. Glad you came. Now if her friend would just shut her mouth before she said something totally embarrassing. Tracy knew all about her feelings for Carter, about their standing Friday movie nights, and how he'd never once made a move. God, could she be more pathetic? Tracy skirted around the corner and gasped when she laid eyes on the pup. Oh, my God. Her jaw went slack. Isn't he the cutest? She ripped him from Faith's arms before she could hand him over. Cupping the dog in her hands, Tracy rubbed his fur against her face, made mewing sounds against his belly, and let him lick her face. They were practically bonded. Well, except for the fact that Tracy wasn't a werewolf and didn't know about werewolves or their lifelong bonding process. Considering they'd just tongued, those were minor details. Where'd you get him? Tracy cooed, her blue eyes twinkling bright. He's just the most adorable little thing. Aren't you, boy? Aren't you? I'm watching him for the shelter. Mind holding him while I show you what I was thinking for tonight? Not at all. Tracy settled onto the edge of the bed and continued to make out with the furball. We'll sit and watch together. I'm still here, Carter yelled from the living room. I want to see. Why do you care so much about her wardrobe anyway? Tracy balked. Are you a control freak or something? Faith heard Carter sigh through the closed bedroom door. I don't want to tell her where we're going for dinner, but I want to make sure she's dressed appropriately. That makes sense, I guess. After kicking off her Converse, Faith stripped out of her jeans and cable knit sweater. She stepped into a deep purple pantsuit, zipped up and shrugged into the matching coat. Option 1, she said, spreading her arms wide. What do you think? As Tracy detached her face from the pooch, she shrieked. Sweetheart, the color's great, but the outfit is only an option if it's 1993. Are those shoulder pads? No. Faith jabbed at her shoulders to make sure. Maybe. It's not that bad. It's not that great. Tracy leaned over the bed and mouthed the next words. You want him to like you, right? How to answer? Faith nodded, feeling naked even though she was cloaked in purple polyester. Then take it off and burn it. Show me, Carter barked. As Faith opened the bedroom door to show him, Tracy lifted the pup in front of her face and hid behind him. Carter laughed, covered it with a gulp of his Starbucks. Tracy's right. Burn it. I said it was an option. Faith grabbed the open door and slammed it shut, in Carter's laughing face. She stripped down and dressed in option number 2, a simple black dress with spaghetti straps and a low-cut front. The bottom was plain, reaching her feet, but the top showed off the girls. Better? She asked Tracy, spinning around. Tracy peeked out from behind the pup, who whimpered at the sight of the dress. Better, she said, flipping her blonde curls over her shoulder. But not right. Go show Carter that one so he sees the rack you're always hiding under. Those hideous t-shirts. Faith planted her hands on her hips. She didn't want to show him her rack. She wanted him to like her for who she was, to think she was sexy no matter what she wore. Move, Tracy mouthed. Show him what he's missing. With a huff, Faith shuffled into the living room and spun around. Carter had moved to the couch and slid forward so that his body was flat, with his head supported by a scrunched-up throw pillow. Thoughts of straddling his middle invaded Faith's brain. He could stay just like that. She could put her feet on the floor on either side of him. Faith, he said. Did you hear me? I'm sorry. She shook dirty thoughts of him out of her head. What? I said you've got a lint sheet stuck right there on the back. Disaster. She showed him what he was missing all right. A freaking lint sheet. She twisted and bent around, ripped the sheet off and crumpled it into a ball. What do you think? Overall, I think we're getting closer. Do you remember that girl I took to the office Christmas party last year? Vixian. Of course. Couldn't forget a name or a woman like that. She was a complete hooch, salivating over every word Carter said. Faith had only met Vixie once, but it was enough to leave a bad taste in her mouth. She'd painted a picture that things were too perfect. Her boobs were too perky, their sex was too hot. He cuddled with her all night long, bibbidi-boppidi-blah. I think so, Faith said, repressing her gag reflex. Red hair, Jessica Rabbit type. No, I like redheads, he corrected. She was the blonde fatal attraction type. Don't remember. Wouldn't expect you to. He sat upright. Anyhow, she knew how to put on a good show. How to make everyone in the room think that she was the most gorgeous one there, even if she wasn't. She oozed confidence and grace, and that's what made her sexy. It's probably also what made her crazy, Tracy said from the doorway. But if it's sexy starlet that you're going for, I can turn our duck into a swan. I'll need a few hours alone with her. As long as I know she's in capable hands. Carter stood and chucked his coffee cup into the recycling. I'm out of here. Tracy set down the pup. It made a beeline for Carter's boot. He high-stepped, but the pooch went after the other. Call your dog, Carter said, holding his foot high. Do something. Tracy erupted into laughter as Faith scooped the dog off Carter's boot. Okay, she soothed. I've got you now. You'd be cute if you weren't such a little humping freak. Carter flattened the fur on the top of the dog's head. Humperdinck. He met Faith's eyes. I think I've just named your dog. Chapter 7. Carter ran up the steps to Faith's cabin and knocked on the front door. He didn't normally knock at her place, but he wasn't normally picking her up for a date either. This isn't a date, he reminded himself. It's an arrangement. Was this really going to work? Faith had become a great friend, but were they going to be able to pull off a ruse like this? Would the council believe they were a couple? Every member in attendance would be a werewolf with heightened senses and a keen nose for smelling bullshit. They could sense when a wolf had marked his mate, and when they'd completed the bonding process to seal their fates together. Lucky for him and Faith, they had a perfectly rational explanation for why they hadn't completed the werewolf's bonding process. He'd already found and lost his mate, and wolves only had one luminary in each lifetime. Faith would be a wife, but never his luminary. He doubted anyone on the council would bring that up, but it would be the logical whisper in the back of their head if they started to doubt their relationship. To really hit it home, Carter would have to create a spark with Faith where there was none. Remember to gaze at her from across the room all night. Whisper sweet things in her ear and palm the small of her back to guide her into the room. They were friends, for Christ's sake. This was going to be difficult. As the door swung open, Carter stepped back. Tracy peeked her head between the screen and the door. You're not going to believe what I did to our girl, she whispered. Hope she didn't change too much. Can I come in? He closed his coat as a chill swept across the porch. The moon was full tonight and a storm was closing in. It'd pour before the night was through. Tracy backed into the living room, holding the door open wide. Faith, he's here. Faith didn't need an announcement. With her heightened senses, she'd be able to pick up his scent the instant he stepped on her property. Something was missing. The tiny fluffy thing that should have been attached to his ankle. Where's Humperdinck? A whimper escaped from the crate beside the couch. He couldn't control his urges, so we locked him up for a bit. Tracy fell into the corner of the couch and tucked her knees beneath her. He took a liking to the TV remote. She giggled, tossing her hair over her shoulder in an attempt to be flirtatious. He went after the Roomba too, but yelped when it spun and tried to clean off his paw. Humping prison. He patted the top of the crate. Feel bad for you, little guy. Do you know who I feel bad for? Tracy grabbed his arm and held him tight as she whispered, You if you hurt one hair on Faith's head. His huffed, Don't be ridiculous. I'm not going to hurt her. Then don't play games. Tracy's expression darkened. Why do you ask her out? He tilted his head and narrowed his eyes. Because I want to go out with her. Why else? But she's not your type. And you know my type? I know that she's the exact opposite of every single girl you've dated in the last year. She's nice, she's real, and she's not some plastic bimbo looking for a fun time. I know that. He folded his arms over his chest. Maybe my tastes have changed. Her lips twisted. Maybe so, but consider yourself warned. Warned about what? Faith's voice sang from the direction of her bedroom. Carter turned and sucked in a clipped breath. She was a vision. A staggering beauty in an emerald green dress that pinched together at her waist and emphasized curves he didn't realize she had. The dress flared at her hips and covered her feet. The fabric over her chest was loose and scrunched into a few wispy layers that showed off an ample amount of milky white cleavage. What did you do to her? He asked, his mouth going dry. Tracy sighed. Everything. What do you think? Faith crossed her hands shyly in front of her. Too much. No, he took a step closer. Stopped as his knees wobbled. You'll wow everyone at the party. She turned her espresso-colored eyes downward as if he'd said something wrong. Didn't every woman want to turn heads when they went out? Are you ready? He asked, extending his hand. Let me get my clutch. She disappeared into the kitchen. Tracy snapped for Carter's attention. Remember what I did to Humperdinck when he couldn't control himself. Next stop is the surgeon. She made cutting motions with her hands. Snip, snip, if you get my drift. Let that be a lesson to you. Suppressing a shiver, Carter stepped outside and waited on the porch for Faith to join him. The pull to the moon made the blood chug through his veins at a normal pace again. His reaction to seeing Faith was bizarre. So not like him. Must be the full moon. Faith couldn't stop her knees from shaking. They knocked together all the way down I-90 to Mercer Island, no matter how she pressed her hands against her thighs to make them chill out. She didn't feel right in this dress. It was too tight, too much like the dresses that Carter's other girlfriends wore. Her heels, the black stilettos that Tracy had let her borrow, were too high. She was going to fall right off and sprain her ankle. This wasn't her. But this was who Carter needed for tonight. You'll do great, Carter said, his hands gripping the steering wheel hard as he turned off the freeway. All you've got to do is pretend you're madly in love with me. Shouldn't be too difficult considering she wasn't far off. I told you I've got this. She took a deep breath and stared out the window. At the full moon. She could feel its pull tugging on something deep within her. Being a turned wolf, this was the only time of the month when she had the ability to shift. Carter had it easy. As a born wolf, he could shift when he wanted. Although he felt the pull to the moon, his shifts were mostly driven by extreme emotions, such as anger or grief. Did he date both born and turned wolves? I remember how Vixian used to act when you went out with her, she said. If that's what you want, that's who I'll be. He looked at her, his light eyes piercing her through the dark. If I wanted Vixian at my side, I would have asked her to marry me. That's sweet of you to say. He'd probably lost her number. As he turned down Fabian Drive, rows of cars appeared on either side of the road. He parallel parked his Tahoe between two Porsches, killed the engine, and turned to her. He was so breathtakingly handsome, it nearly pained her to look at him. His dark hair was cut short, but the nearby streetlight still managed to pick up shades of chestnut and auburn in the strands. His cheekbones were high and defined, his jaw a thick length of bone that supported a set of plush lips that she dreamed of kissing on more than one occasion. Those lips were too sensual, too enticing. He was probably an amazing kisser. It was his eyes, though, that held her captive. They were ice blue, the color of the purest glacier, yet they weren't cold. They radiated warmth straight to her core. There's only one thing left to do, he said, and dug into the pocket inside his tuxedo jacket. It would look funny if I'd asked you to marry me without giving you a ring. Her breath hitched as he pulled out a small velvet box and handed it to her. Holding it in her palm, Faith got the feeling that this was it. She was standing on a precipice, looking out over the vast span of her future with Carter. They'd be married. She'd be a wife and have a husband who worked for the Enforcement Bureau. The future looked bright when painted that way. Only as soon as he got the promotion and established himself, she'd be divorced and alone. Her heart stuttered as she flipped open the lid. The ring was white gold or maybe platinum. Simple band with a small square diamond in the center. It was cute, modest. Didn't want anything too extravagant, he said. Do you like it? Sure. Of course. Absent-mindedly, Faith wondered what kind of ring Carter had bought his ex-wife. Was he the excessive shower your woman with jewels kind of guy? Or was he the subtle sweet kind of boyfriend who didn't think the depth of his love equated to the size of the diamond sitting on his woman's finger? He talked about his girlfriends on Friday nights, but the conversations usually hovered around their clinginess or desire to settle down. He never really talked about how he treated them. She plucked the ring from its velvet bed and slipped it on her finger. It was loose but wouldn't fall off. It felt odd, misplaced, probably because the engagement was fake. Better get used to this feeling. She'd probably feel odd and misplaced at Carter's side all night. If it needs to be resized, Carter said, I can take it in later. I think it's fine. She didn't know why, but she couldn't meet his eyes. This was all too awkward. Couldn't they go back to being friends? On impulse she leaned over and gave him an elbow to the gut. Thanks. No, thank you for doing this. I would have been up shit creek without you. He smirked, revealing a tiny dimple on his left cheek. We should probably get in. There. Ready. After taking a deep breath, Faith willed confidence to fill her. She spun the ring on her finger and glanced at Carter out of the corner of her eye. He looked as nervous as she felt. Be someone else. Play the part. You're going to get the job, she said, channeling the sexy cool confidence of someone she wasn't. I'll make sure of it. He pulled back his shoulders. Then let's do this.